I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer.
First off tonight, Robert Mueller has obtained a new guilty plea as he investigates Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Before today, 3 people have already admitted their guilt to the special counsel. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos, and a California man, Richard Pinedo. Now Alex van der Zwaan, the son-in-law of one of Russia's wealthiest men, has pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Tonight, a White House dealing with ongoing crisis. The press secretary today claiming Trump was tougher on Russia in 2017 than Obama's 8 years as president.
As you know, our practice is not to confirm the existence of ongoing investigations, especially those investigations that involve classified matters. But in unusual circumstances, where it is in the public interest, it may be appropriate to do so, as Justice Department policies recognize. This is one of those circumstances. I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
Does the president now acknowledge what the special counsel indictments made clear, which is that Russians not only tried to meddle but interfere and influence the 2016 election?
Absolutely, and the president has acknowledged that multiple times before.
She doesn't know if it's the Russians doing the hacking. Maybe there is no hacking. Could be Russia, but it could also be China, most importantly, because we're hacked by everybody. The whole Russian thing, that's a ruse. That's a ruse. Could have been China, could have been a lot of different groups. The Russia story is a total fabrication. I call it the Russian hoax. No, Russia did not help me. That I can tell you, okay? It's a Democrat hoax that was brought up as an excuse for losing an election.
Absolutely, and the president has acknowledged that multiple times before.
Today, the president also went back to using his predecessor as a foil. Quote, "I have been much tougher on Russia than Obama. Just look at the facts. Total fake news."
The president hasn't even criticized Vladimir Putin about this. He hasn't even called out Putin. He criticized Obama. He criticized the FBI. He didn't even criticize Vladimir Putin.
He has been tougher on Russia in the first year that Obama was in 8 years combined.
When people like me, I like them. Even Putin, you know, Putin, they want me to disavow Putin. Putin of Russia.
Good morning, everybody. In recent months, as the citizens of Ukraine have made their voices heard, we have been guided by a fundamental principle. The future of Ukraine must be decided by the people of Ukraine. That means Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and international law must be upheld. And so Russia's decision to send troops into Crimea has rightly drawn global condemnation. From the start, the United States has mobilized the international community in support of Ukraine, to isolate Russia for its actions and to reassure our allies and partners. We saw this international unity again over the weekend when Russia stood alone in the UN Security Council defending its actions in Crimea. And as I told President Putin yesterday, the referendum in Crimea was a clear violation of Ukrainian constitutions and international law, and it will not be recognized by the international community. Today I'm announcing a series of measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. First, as authorized by the executive order I signed 2 weeks ago, we are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine. We're making it clear that there are consequences for their actions. Second, I have signed a new executive order that expands the scope of our sanctions. As an initial step, I'm authorizing sanctions on Russian officials, entities operating in the arms sector in Russia, and individuals who provide material support to senior officials of the Russian government. And if Russia continues to interfere in Ukraine, we stand ready to impose further sanctions. Third, we're continuing our close consultations with our European partners, who today in Brussels moved ahead with their own sanctions against Russia. Tonight, Vice President Biden departs for Europe, where he will meet with the leaders of our NATO allies, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And I'll be traveling to Europe next week. Our message will be clear. As NATO allies, we have a solemn commitment to our collective defense, and we will uphold this commitment. Fourth, we'll continue to make clear to Russia that further provocations will achieve nothing except to further isolate Russia and diminish its place in the world. The international community will continue to stand together to oppose any violations of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, and continued Russian military intervention in Ukraine will only deepen Russia's diplomatic isolation and exact a greater toll on the Russian economy. Going forward, we can calibrate our response based on whether Russia chooses to escalate or to de-escalate the situation. Now, I believe there's still a path to resolve this situation diplomatically in a way that addresses the interests of both Russia and Ukraine. That includes Russia pulling its forces in Crimea back to their bases, supporting the deployment of additional international monitors in Ukraine, and engaging in dialogue with the Ukrainian government, which has indicated its openness to pursuing constitutional reform as they move forward towards elections this spring. But throughout this process, we're going to stand firm in our unwavering support for Ukraine. As I told Prime Minister Yatsenyuk last week, the United States stands with the people of Ukraine and their right to determine their own destiny. We're going to keep working with Congress and our international partners to offer Ukraine the economic support that it needs to weather this crisis and to improve the daily lives of the Ukrainian people. And as we go forward, we'll continue to look at the range of ways we can help our Ukrainian friends achieve their universal rights and the security, prosperity, and dignity that they deserve.
On the day of President Trump's inauguration, Flynn had texted a business associate about a plan to join Russia in building some nuclear reactors in the Middle East. And he said that this project was, quote, good to go. And one reason why, according to this whistleblower's account, was because the administration was prepared to rip up sanctions with Russia. Now, this is the strongest indication that we have to date that Michael Flynn and the administration perhaps was moving towards easing sanctions on Russia.
The Obama administration announced new sanctions against Russia in response to the country's reported involvement in meddling with the 2016 election, kicking out dozens of Russian diplomats and imposing sanctions on a handful of Russian leaders close to President Vladimir Putin.
I'm just trying to get a straight answer. Like, did you meet Sergei Kislyak in Cleveland? Did you talk to him? I'm not going to deny that I talked with them.
I did not have communications with the Russians.
We begin with breaking news out of Washington. Attorney General Jeff Sessions facing calls to resign over 2 pre-election meetings with the Russian ambassador to the U.S.
Never a dull moment. Sessions had told lawmakers that he had not communicated with the Russians. Well, it turns out he had.
I actually have communicated with Assange. I believe the next tranche of his documents pertain to the Clinton Foundation.
Overnight news out of the nation's capital after just a few weeks on the job, President Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, handing in his resignation.
It follows allegations that Flynn misled the administration about his discussions with the Russian ambassador.
Breaking news, CNN learning tonight that Jared Kushner's testimony on his dealings with Russian officials will be private.
Breaking news and new this morning, the Associated Press is reporting that President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, secretly worked for a Russian billionaire to advance the interests of Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Donald Trump is gushing again over Vladimir Putin.
Well, let me say, hearing that story today was the first I heard of it.
That was not actually the question you were asked. But
Nobody asked when you heard of it, but twice, without being asked when he first heard of this, twice, Mike Pence volunteers that this is all news to him. Never heard this before.
You're disappointed by the story. The first I heard of it.
It is impossible that this is the first time Mike Pence has heard of it. It's impossible. Mike Pence was the head of the transition. While all of those news stories about Mike Flynn being on the Turkish government's payroll were breaking, he was the head of the transition when Mike Flynn was being vetted for the National Security Advisor job. He was the head of the transition when Congress formally notified the head of the transition that Mike Flynn appears to be on a foreign government's payroll. He was the head of the transition when Mike Flynn's personal lawyers came and told the head of the transition that Mike Flynn maybe needed to register as a foreign agent. And now Mike Pence's explanation for this whole story, inexplicably, is he's never heard any of this.
Let me say, hearing that story today was the first I heard of it.
That cannot be true.
Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin, a conversational relationship, or anything that you feel you have sway or influence over his government?
I do have a relationship.
I have never heard about any projects in Russia, but it's a big market. Maybe it should be interesting for such a businessman.
It is. I've been there many times, and I've spent quite a bit of time in Moscow.
Errol Barnett is traveling with the president at his golf course in New Jersey. Joins me now from Piscataway. So, Errol, we know at least 7 people were in this meeting. This list keeps growing. Can you tell us more about these additional names that have been added?
Well, let's just tally up who we know was there. First, you had Team Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, who was the chairman of the campaign at the time, and Jared Kushner, the trusted advisor to then candidate Trump and now the president. Then you had the intermediary, Rod Goldstone, the publicist who was in email contact with Donald Trump Jr. to set this meeting up and introduce him to the Russians. That gets us up to 4 people in the room, and then you have the Russians. As I mentioned there, you had Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer, lobbying to get sanctions lifted. She had a translator with her, Anatoly Samoshornov, and in addition to those individuals, the AP is reporting on Renat Akhmetchin, who I just discussed in that story, who is a Russian-American believed to have links to Russian intelligence. Now, CNN is reporting on an 8th individual. They say, quote, was there as a relative of the meeting, as a relative of the family member who requested the meeting. And you have this discrepancy on exact numbers because the Trump campaign was not completely forthcoming at the time, and only last week when the New York Times said it would report on this meeting did Donald Trump Jr. start to release changing details about who was there. So journalists are essentially having to piece this together because the Trump campaign itself has not been forthcoming.
I want to respectfully disagree with my dear friend Joaquin Castro, next to whom I sit on the Intelligence Committee. He said he would not be surprised if people ended up going to jail. I will be surprised if people don't end up going to jail.
I don't know Putin. I have no idea. I never met Putin.
Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin, a conversational relationship, or anything that you feel you have sway or influence over his government?
I do have a relationship.
I never met Putin. I don't know who Putin is. What do I have to get involved with Putin for? I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him.
You did say on 3 different occasions you had a relationship with him. Now you say there is none.
Putin even sent me a present, beautiful present, with a beautiful note. I spoke to all of his people.
I have no relationship with Putin. I don't think I've ever met him. I never met him. I don't think I've ever met him.
You would know it if you did, wouldn't you?
I think so, yeah, I think so. So I don't think I've ever met him. I mean, if he's in the same room or something, but I don't think so.
One of the great memories of all time.
Never spoken to him on the phone?
I've been in Moscow. I didn't meet him in Moscow. Where?
Never spoken to him on the phone?
I have never spoken to him on the phone, no. I was in Russia. I was in Moscow recently. And I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer.
You said for 3 years, 13, 14, and 15, that you did have a relationship with him.
No, look, what do you call a relationship? I mean, he treats me with great respect.
I do have a relationship.
What do I have to get involved with Putin for? I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him.
Putin wants to go in, and I got to know him very well because we were both on 60 Minutes. We were stablemates, and we did very well that night.